All right, my friends, let's begin. I'm caffeinated, which is a dangerous thing.
Way to go.
So let's set the stage for the Victorian world, pre-Gilbert and Sullivan. Theater wasn't what we think of it as today, as an elevated experience, like we go to the opera, we put on our finery, we go out. It was a low class and not terribly well respected in Victorian society. Theater was kind of looked down upon by the upper class, and Gilbert and Sullivan was going to demolish all that. Okay, now I am a college professor and I'm a music person, so I'm going to talk a little bit of background and place these pieces about why this is so enduringly popular. So in Victorian era, we saw the growth of population, we saw the expansion of the middle class. We also saw that in Germany a little earlier with the expansion, and the middle class wanted music. They wanted pianos in their house. They wanted string quartets. They wanted choral societies. That was a thing born out of the Industrial Revolution. People wanted to be able to participate in music. Before 1830, there was no such thing as buying a ticket, or 1815. There was no buying a ticket to a concert. That didn't exist. That was invented in Paris at the Playa, where they actually started with tickets for sale. That was a new thing. That means people who could afford it could come to a concert. It wasn't just the courts, and it wasn't just the church. So now we're seeing music explode to everywhere in between. Okay, so in Victorian London, you saw in the 1870s, you saw the population growing. You saw the invention of streetlights, gas streetlights, so it was safer to walk around at night, because going around at night was a dangerous thing, and it wasn't for high society. So going to an opera or going to a musical was a little bit different. So these pre-Gilbert and Sullivan, they were burlesque shows, a lot of burlesque shows. They were and that's what Sullivan started writing, was burlesque shows. And it wasn't until we have this young man, Sullivan, who was the darling of the aristocracy, and he was fated to be the next great composer. He was friends with the Queen. I mean, he was a person who was going to write the next great symphony, the next great grand opera. But really, what he wrote were some of the most incredible pieces of musical theater operetta that have ever been written. So, a little bit about Gilbert and Sullivan.
Yes, so you gave a great introduction to Sullivan, and then he stumbled into W.S. Gilbert, a playwright at the time, and then the two of them combined to not create the genre. Offenbach was already doing operetta, but really to create what pure British operetta was at the time. And every single Gilbert and Sullivan operetta really focuses on the British class system, as you were talking about. It's for the middle class. So they are discussing nobility. They are also discussing the middle class in all of their shows, regardless of where they put them. So Pirates is very, very interesting because it was the fourth show that they collaborated on, and it just came after HMS Pinafore. How many of you have seen HMS Pinafore before? Yes, that is also one of their most popular shows. So that is really where that partnership took off, and they realized that they were going to be something special. They also got international attention. So they were getting produced all over the United States without their knowledge that they were being produced in that way. It was a very different time. You can't just scroll on Facebook and go, oh, that's a production of my work.
We'll do Hamilton next week.
Exactly.
You can't do that, yeah. The lawyers would be all over us.
So they realized that, and they did a couple of things with their next collaboration of Pirates. First of all, the use of the words pirates is very funny because it's called pirating when you were taking somebody's work without copyright. We still use that term today. So they were slyly hinting at that. And then they went, we're going to premiere it in the United States. Aren't you so lucky? Because they were trying to do this wink, wink, nudge, nudge. We're excited to bring our work to America, but they were really trying to get an American copyright so that they could earn money on the productions that were happening in the United States. Funnily enough, we talk about that part. We don't talk about the fact that it didn't work.
Yeah, no, it didn't work, yep.
They tried really, really hard. It was still a massive success, and then they premiered it in London the next year. So it is the quintessential Gilbert and Sullivan. They have all of the different things that are so prevalent within the genre itself are prevalent within Pirates of Penzance. This is really where they solidified their partnership, solidified their stock characters that they used throughout their repertoire, and really took off both nationally and internationally.
Quick humorous note: the role of what's the famous aria in this piece? The first famous song in this piece. I am the very model lover, right? Right. Well, the Gilbert and Sullivan patter song, the first opera to have this role, which was a new innovation in their music, that the lead be played by almost a non-singing actor, which is kind of surprising in an opera, wouldn't you say? That was in The Sorcerer, first used in their Sorcerer, and it was Sullivan's brother who played that role. I'll turn it back
That's
over.
very cool.
Yep.
Yes, so to follow up on that, in the stock characters, Gilbert and Sullivan has the patter baritone. That is a quintessential thing. It is typically a primary leading man. It is typically an older man of a father figure. And as Jason said, a lot of the notes are less important than the text, which is something really interesting, how Gilbert and Sullivan were equals in what they were bringing. Sullivan was bringing the music, Gilbert was bringing the dialogue and the lyrics, but really giving a chance to those lyrics to shine in a way that a grand opera does not tend to do so. So we also have the obvious leading man and leading lady, the tenor and soprano, that tend to fall in love against all odds, and then the hijinks from that taking course over the entire operetta itself. And then there's always a chorus of males and females that are typically introduced separately and then come together in an epic double chorus number. I always say that the chorus is the leading role of Gilbert and Sullivan. They are treated with such respect. They are integrated into the full plot. They are given their own chances to shine as characters. So it is something that very much differs from the operas that we tend to produce, and is something that makes this really special, that everybody who's on stage gets to do something really incredible.
One thing I want to point out on this show in particular is the use of satire. Now, William Schwenk Gilbert was a biting satirist because he originally failed in different pursuits before becoming a librettist. So he was a lawyer, and it didn't really work out for him. He tried to be a military man. It didn't really work out for him. So where does he focus his attention on? Satire of society. And it's often biting satire, but couched in music that is just delightful. So if you're going for great melodies and a fun night at the theater, you're happy. If you're going for subversive entertainment that bites in a lot of ways, you're also happy. Let's look at some of the elements of Pirates that are satirical. You have the authority figure who is incompetent. The major general is great at everything except the military. He talks about mathematical principles and the frogs of Aristophanes, but he doesn't know anything about military strategy. Let's talk about the police sergeant who's supposed to go and slay these pirates, but is completely a coward. And all the policemen are trembling, and it's really, really funny. So you have these elements of the society, and topsy-turvy. You want to talk about topsy-turvy? What is this element? You have to know topsy-turvy to understand Gilbert and Sullivan.
Yes, Topsy-Turvy was a movie that was, I don't actually remember exactly when it was premiered.
90s.
But yes, was about the Gilbert and Sullivan troupe and how they put it on. They were highlighting the Mikado specifically, which is the third of the three major Gilbert and Sullivans that I'm sure that you all know. But they were a troupe, they were a family, and that started with Pinafore and Pirates and then continued throughout their entire history. But their people would premiere the same type of role time and time again. It would be important to get to be a member of the company, and the size of the role that you got was a big deal and insinuated your favor with Gilbert and Sullivan, to the point where when they were getting later into their rep and folks were a little touchy about the size of the role that they were getting in comparison to others. The Gondoliers, I don't know how many of you know that, it's one of their later collaborations. If you notice it, every role is a principal role in almost the same exact size. All 9 standard principal roles are meant to be the same size, so that they got the same billing, they got the same paycheck. And it was very important that people stopped the infighting that they were doing.
How long is Gondoliers?
Gondoliers is one of the solid longer ones. Mikado and Gondoliers were back to back, and they were about 3 hours long each. So the Mikado was long, closer to grand opera, along with Yeoman. Sullivan at that moment was trying to stretch his chops a little bit more into the grand opera scheme again. They were fighting, as well as the people were fighting. Families fight. You know how that all is. But the Gondoliers has 2 entire plots that are separate from each other. So they have 9 principal characters. And then the size of, let's say, Edith and Kate in Pirates of Penzance, they also have those in Gondoliers. So you're looking at 14 or 15 primary characters that they then had to cast. It was a very expensive endeavor for them, but luckily they were successful enough to be able to do it at the time.
So luckily, Pirates, it runs a trim, 2 hours and 20 minutes, 2 hours and 30 minutes. It paced incredibly well. As a conductor, I'm going through the score, I'm like, Act 1 ends, I'm like, it's over, where did it go? It's so fast, the pacing is so fast. In Act 2, same thing. And that's unusual. Usually in an opera, there's usually this time where, boy, this you have to really kind of carefully pace. It paces itself. The dialogue is so quick and witty. The music is so infectious. It just kind of moves. I think with Gondoliers being much longer, they had to accomplish all that. That pads the running time of the show, too. It makes things interesting.
Yes, exactly. And the quintessential Gilbert and Sullivan Act 1 finale, as you already mentioned, is one of the staples of their Gilbert and Sullivan repertoire. They attack so many different musical moments. They throw so much plot into there. They're usually 15 to 20 minutes long, and they leave you wanting more when you go to the lobby in intermission. Even back then, when they probably weren't selling snacks in the same way that we do, we want you to come back. And then they spend the entirety of Act 2 resolving all of the things that were brought up in that Act 1 finale. So, also, I have not asked, how many of you have seen Pirates before? Nice. Great. So there's actually a couple of folks who haven't. So we can go into some of the themes that are in Pirates specifically plot-wise. So the big thing is leap year, a magical thing that none of us particularly think about that much in day-to-day life, but it can cause some major hijinks. So Frederick is a pirate apprentice. He's about to turn 21 at midnight, and he was apprenticed by Ruth mistakenly. She was hard of hearing, and she mixed up where she was supposed to bring him, and then out of guilt has stayed along. So there's Frederick and Ruth hanging out with a bunch of pirates. And Jason mentioned some folks that were not particularly good at their jobs. These pirates are also quite terrible at their jobs, as in...
And tender-hearted.
Yes. They will not attack anybody weaker than them or anybody who is an orphan, because they are all orphans themselves, and that is how they have become pirates. So they are not making a lot of money. They love each other. They're supposed to be these grand, fearful people. Nobody's really scared of them, because if they get captured, they go, hey, I'm an orphan, and they'll go, okay, go on your way. So that becomes important later, and as Frederick realizes that there are women on this planet other than Ruth, he leaves her, stumbles upon this bevy of beautiful maidens, as they are described, and asks for one of them to save him, give a hand in marriage. They all refuse, except for Mabel, who's a little bit eccentric, a little bit different than her sisters. And the two of them immediately fall in love. As all of these ladies are captured by the pirates, the Major General comes out, sings that iconic Major General song, and then we get into an orphan versus orphan debacle with British accents.
The genius of Gilbert.
Very difficult to tell the difference between those two words. So we do that, which then leads into the Act 1 finale of them being able to escape because the Major General is an orphan. And then Act 2, we learned that both the Major General is not an orphan, and he has major guilt about that, and that Leap Day exists, and Frederick was born on Leap Day. So he is not turning 21, he is turning 5 and a little bit. And that becomes a major issue for his marriage with Mabel. So he must go back to being a pirate, he must go back to also confessing that the Major General is not an orphan, because he is now back on enemy lines. The police force is involved. They are not very good at their jobs, but what they are is clever. So they find a loophole that I will not spoil, but as in all Gilbert and Sullivan, I will spoil that everybody ends happily ever after. So that is what we're dealing with, and we are dealing with a lot of themes of British society and I will spoil that the Queen's involved in some way. So we are doing our love of our Queen, and we are doing all of these different things. Will love conquer all? Will love conquer duty? The number of times that duty is said in the show is astounding.
It's the Pirates of Penzance or the Slave of Duty. And you'll see over and over the Slave of Duty. Frederick agrees to go back to his indentures for another, till 1940. It takes place in the 1890s, so he's supposed to go till 1940. So.
Yes, one of my favorite lines is Mabel going, that seems so long. So you're like, okay, that's true. But again, what you were saying about the earnestness that's really important that comes out of this. The humor comes in the fact that these people are more than in it. When I am directing things, I always say that humor comes from truth. So if you're trying to be funny, you're never going to be funny. If you are the most serious about this thing yourself, everybody else who's watching will find it hysterical. So they're really, really good at that.
In Gilbert and Sullivan, in Gilbert's writing, this topsy-turvy, you've got this idea of noble criminals, you've got inept aristocracy and figures of authority, and he does it in such a delightfully interesting and curious way. So, and the music, and you literally would, if you're just listening for the great tunes and the catchy tunes, you get every catchy tune in this show. I think this is probably their most earworm-heavy show. Yeah. And it's every piano, I've been singing them around the house. It's just driving everyone crazy.
Do you want to go into some of the musical? They also pirated from other folks. They were hinting on piracy themselves, but they were, this one more than any other Gilbert and Sullivan, really paying homage to different musical composers throughout the day.
Yeah, there's a lot of Verdi, a little bit of Verdi, a lot of bel canto reference, and really this, the roles of Frederick and Mabel are quite operatic, and the most challenging of their operatic writing to date. So Frederick is the longest tenor role in the repertoire, and is quite difficult and demanding, and he almost never leaves the stage, so he's there most of the time, and he is the most earnest and sincere. And really, with this show, and with Gilbert and Sullivan, what makes their music truly revolutionary is a lot of musical theater owes itself to direct lineage of Gilbert and Sullivan. Before it, the pastiches and the burlesques, they were just interchangeable songs that you can swap out with another, and it didn't really matter all that much to the plots of contrivance. With Gilbert and Sullivan, they insisted that there were no added words, there were no added music, there was no added interpolation. Everything had to be exactly as they said. And they were, Gilbert became the director, the stage director, and became a very famous stage director in his day. And he controlled every element of the plot, the sets, the lighting, the scenery, and Sullivan did the same with the music. So Sullivan, being a person, he graduated from the Royal Conservatory at a young age. He was a master. His father was a band master, and he mastered all the instruments of the band by 11. And he was really going to be Britain's next serious composer. And he was deeply offended when at the end of his career, after he had finished writing comic operas, he was writing grand oratorios for huge choral festivals, and he was backstage with a dear friend and a fellow composer, and he said, "I think this is my greatest composition to date." And she goes, and she meant seriously, she said, "Your greatest piece is the Mikado." And he never spoke to her again. There was he was trying, he had this great expectation. And in fact, the aristocracy, the Queen in particular, said, you're now a knight of the British Empire. You shouldn't be lowering yourself to writing musical comedies. Grand opera, symphonies, grand oratorios, but really, these oratorios are of such a high level, these comic operas are of such a high level. The music is just, to write melody that is so engaging is truly spectacular. Also, his orchestration is wonderful. He clearly understands operatic tradition, he clearly understands orchestration, and he knows how to write a tune that grabs you instantly. Also, the use of the ensemble is spectacular. The chorus is one of the great characters, but it's because it's so well written. The bevy of beautiful maidens singing Climbing Over Rocky Mountain. When you've got the grand ensembles like the Act 1 finale and the Act 2 finale, they are very bel canto influenced. So there's poking little jabs at the use of Verdi's, come of some of his great chordal endings, and there's moments you're going to hear that imitate grand opera, but to great effect. And it makes it even funnier because he's taking it out of context, topsy-turvy once again. So it's this kind of like upside down. What's interesting about their artistic collaboration, which actually caused a lot of friction, was each of them, as they got on with their relationship, thought that they were lowering their art for each other's sake. So, but in reality, they were two geniuses, and they worked together. And it takes a long time for most composer librettists to really create something special. Verdi, for example, wrote a lot of operas that are great musically, but don't work on the stage as well because the libretto suffers. They have to be 50-50 in order for a good opera to happen. And if you look at Il Trovatore, one of the great musical operas ever written, the libretto is not great. It really is not a top-tier Verdi piece. It doesn't function the same way, even though the music is great. You need a great librettist to make a great opera because the stage is equally as important. as the music. So with Sullivan's writing, his use of the ensemble, his orchestration, and his gift for writing beautiful melody, and we talk about sincerity, what makes this music so good is that Gilbert always starts with a ridiculous plot, kind of a ridiculous plot invention, right? Like this leap year, he's indentured to the pirates because he was supposed to be a pilot, a captain of a ship, and not a pirate. I mean, that's ridiculous. But the whole show is based on that contrivance. That's it. That's the entire plot of the show.
There wasn't a baby mix-up in this one. There's a baby mix-up in many Gilbert and Sullivans. That is the entire core of the plot. And they're just like, we messed up. Which was also taken by Oscar Wilde, if you look at Importance of Being Earnest, and the fact that the baby was in the handbag that was actually, now we're back. Wilde took a ton from Gilbert and Sullivan specifically. So Gilbert and Sullivan was not only sort of the genesis between opera and musical theater, and you can track from Verdi to Gilbert and Sullivan directly to Rodgers and Hammerstein, directly to Sondheim. If you're looking at patter and how Sondheim uses patter, it's very Gilbert and Sullivan-esque. But you can also track people like Oscar Wilde, who was an incredible playwright, producing at the same time in a very similar location, taking those sort of things from the day and bringing them to plays, which was then the genesis of a different style of play as well. So Gilbert and Sullivan really was a launching point for a lot of different operatic and performance styles, which is really exciting. I also love the direct stealing of a cadenza from Traviata right into Poor Wandering One. So when I'm singing those myself, I have to go, which one am I in right now? Because there's 2 notes that are different out of like 25. And you're like, which one am I singing? Okay, and then when you're sitting as a director and you're watching, you're like, they forgot which one they were doing. Okay for them. I understand. So there are some things that are that specific, and there's some things that are just the choral style, and you look at how that was a musical theater thing. Now you go to a musical and you see it on Broadway and you see how important the chorus is. How many of you have seen The Pirates on Broadway, speaking of? Yeah, the new thing. So not many of you, so I'm not going to go too far into it. Yeah, I saw it literally last night, so it's very prevalent in my mind, and it is so different. But it's very clear that the person who made it has love for Gilbert and Sullivan and understands how to use the new lyrics and new conventions to show what Gilbert and Sullivan were doing. And funnily enough, the new librettist of that, Rupert Holmes, is actually the brother of Richard Holmes, who is our Major General. So it's a very small world here of Gilbert and Sullivan. And that's a very Gilbert and Sullivan family. Richard Holmes has been at NIGAS for 50 years
He
now.
said he's done over 250 Captain Corcorans all over the world, at the Gilbert and Sullivan, at the International Gilbert and Sullivan Festival, NIGASP. He's sung with Bill Corson on stage many, many times. And he's sung here with Light Opera of New Jersey, too. So it's been many years, but we were talking about that, and it's great how art ties people together and organizations together. So from Broadway to here, and I had a long conversation with Richard about his brother's creation. His brother was the person who did the conception for the new, was it Pirates?
Pirates, the Penzance musical.
The Penzance musical. So why don't we switch it to what makes this music so enduringly popular?
Yeah.
And why is the source material back on full display on Broadway right now in 2025 when it was written and premiered in 1871?
Yeah. So
79, excuse me.
We've touched on a lot of this already, but there's just something of the genesis between dialogue and music that's missing in a lot of operatic tradition. And you look at Mozart, and Mozart was doing his best to produce in the language of those people and switching the languages that he was writing. So that is not a Gilbert and Sullivan first thing, but it is great for us, and the reason why it's enduring for us is because it is in English, and we're looking at so much grand opera, and we are either needing to translate it to English to make people understand and missing some of that musical element, or performing it in a different language. We're all looking at the super titles, which is well and good, and I still love doing that, but there's something about just being able to listen, close your eyes if you need to, and still hear exactly what's being said. And there's just something about patter that I think was enduring for folks. It was the primary thing that Gilbert and Sullivan did better than anybody else, and it is something that is so prevalent in musical theater now. I mean, you
I'm
look
gonna
at the
say-
early modern Million, you look at
Yeah.
the Matter Trio from Rutherford, and you throw that in, and you're like, okay. You look at the Minions movie, and you see modern major generals. It's everywhere.
The Simpsons, it was on The Simpsons. It was, yeah. I just think it's amazing. I think this is an example of musical topsy-turvy, having the high elevated singing of Frederick and Mabel against the Major General's patter. That's some of their genius, and I think it just keeps on resounding with us today. That this kind of contrast between speech singing and actual song makes it just so interesting and quirky, and it was a formula for great success.
Yeah, I mean, and they realized that they had found something really special. Society had realized that they found something really special, so they were able to continue producing exactly in this musical style for the entirety of their career. I think that the furthest that they went as a collaboration, separate than this, was The Omen of the Guard, which is still incredibly Gilbert and Sullivan, but that was Gilbert's compromise to Sullivan of, I guess you can write a little bit more operatically for this one. And they were having an argument about that, and they did that, and people liked it. They didn't love it as much as Pirates in the time, and people really love it now because they love the differences. But
Gilbert didn't think he could write a grand opera. He's like, I don't think I could actually do this. It's like he really struggled with that, and he had to work through it. And that was their compromise, was to find that kind of almost grand opera.
Right, exactly. And they still had patter, just slightly more singy patter, but couldn't. If you have something that's so perfect, how are you going to be able to stray from it? And they really found something perfect really early on in their collaboration. We're able to stick with it.
Who saw the 1980s Joseph Papp Broadway version of Pirates of Penzance? Did anyone go to see it?
The movie. If you've seen the movie, it's very, very similar.
Kevin Kline?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's amazing how this music just keeps getting reinvented. And I think part of some of the genius of Savoy, the Savoy Theatre Company, the D'Oyly Carte Company, was they found new ways to bring this music to life. So the licensing they did was really, truly, so in order to be able to produce this, and they sold the rights to amateur companies all over the place. And you had to come and watch it at the theater. You had to buy a ticket and go see it. And you had to rent the parts, and all the scores had to be rented. And in order to learn it, they came to see. There was no online rehearsal aids. So they were really very good at marketing. They also came up with having children do the roles and having their parents come, because women didn't as often go to the theater at night because it was kind of scandalous. So by having children do performances of these shows, they marketed it to everybody. So really quite interesting how this stuff got disseminated and how it became so popular. And now we see major opera companies all over the world producing it, like we're doing here in a regional setting. And you see the Met won't do it, but you see like Glimmerglass just did Pirates last year.
Yes, they did.
Troy Cook sang the Major General, who sang at our fundraiser. He sang at our celebration of the stage this fall. So we're seeing it done all over the place by serious opera companies, by light opera companies, by pretty much anything, because this music is so enduringly popular. And I'm just amazed by the response we've seen in our ticket sales. I mean, that's just a one metric. We're looking at that people just love this show. And I think it speaks to everyone. And
yeah, and I mean, this company itself was founded on the light opera tradition, which was very based in Gilbert and Sullivan. So this company has produced so much Gilbert and Sullivan. As we said at the beginning, I run a Gilbert and Sullivan society up in Bergen County. So that has been in existence for 88 years now, not with me in charge of it the entire time. But there's something just so enduring about it. And they have done Gilbert and Sullivan and nothing but Gilbert and Sullivan, and people still love to participate. People have been a member of that society for 50 years. They met their spouse there, they had kids, those kids then started performing there. There's just really something about Gilbert and Sullivan. I don't know if it's because it was created as a troupe and a family, as we were talking about before, but there's something that once you start doing it, you just wind up finding this performance family, and I just see it all over the place. I see it at NIGAS, which is a very professional company, but those people go back time and time again, and you see sort of, oh, that's the principal soprano there, and then that's the principal patter baritone, and I know what I'm gonna get. I know that they know exactly what they're doing with this material, and I get to go enjoy. So we are still trying to tout the way that Gilbert and Sullivan did this rep, too, which I think is really, really interesting, that we show the same respect to this rep as they showed when they were making it.